Welcome to Transcending Comics, a podcast dedicated to trans representation in comic books, manga, and webtoons, both on panel and behind the scenes. I'm your host, Tomi, and today I'm joined by the creative team behind Transphoria, a trans non-binary comic book anthology from Lifeline Comics. The book has an ongoing Kickstarter campaign at the time of recording, which managed to hit its $26,000 goal within just 25 hours. This graphic novel collects 19 short stories about trans and non-binary experiences of gender euphoria in collaboration with dozens of trans and non-binary creators. First, we have the founders of Lifeline Comics, Calamia and Phil Falco. They're comic Kickstarter experts known for anthologies like By Visibility, Hairology, and Rainbow Canvas, as well as their own original comics like Beast and Snow, Witches of Oz, and the popular webtoon Slice of Life. Kat's also known for her comic review channel, Comic Uno, as well as her creator-owned series, like Father Like Daughter, and They Call Her the Dancer. Phil has worked as co-writer and co-creator on several other Lifeline comic series, as well as his own supernatural horror book, Haunting. Welcome to the show, Kat and Phil.
You did your research for sure.
That was the best intro we've ever gotten.
Damn, I always kill it. We're also joined by writer and editor Daniel Falco, whose work has previously been featured in the anthology By Visibility, Still By. Daniel is leading the charge on this book as lead editor of the team, while also contributing a story of his own. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thank you, glad to be here.
And finally, returning to the show is yet another writer featured in the book, Ben Kahn, the writer of Renegade Rule and Captain Laserhawk Crushing Love, and co-host of the Progressively Horrified podcast.
Thank you so much for having me back on, and so glad to be here to talk about this wonderful, wonderful anthology. I am so glad to have gotten to contribute a story for.
See, you missed the best part of the intro, Ben. I was about to say that you're back with a vengeance to tell us about the inspirational queer influence of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure in the form of a comic. So you jumped the gun on that, bud.
I do apologize for that, but I mean, you gotta be careful. I have filled entire podcast hours just talking about JoJo's Bizarre Adventures and how queer it is.
We'll be following up on that in a minute, but first, I just wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today, and even more so, thank you for creating literally the perfect comic for this podcast subject matter.
Yeah, no, we were happy to be able to curate this book and just put those stories out there.
Yeah, it's honestly one of the most rewarding experiences every year, putting these anthologies together and, getting to work with such a variety of different creators at all levels, from creators telling their first story, creating their first comic, to, seasoned veterans, people who've published so many comics.
Like Ben.
Yeah, this was my dream anthology. Queer storytelling is always something that's very close to me, but trans specific and getting stories from a lot of different genres was really important to me. So honestly, perfect project and great way to start Pride Month.
Yes, absolutely. Always happy, showing especially the more fun side of gender euphoria and getting to celebrate, all the things that open doors, no matter how silly, and really just especially celebrating the camp of it all.
Now, I think I'd like to start us off by asking the team about the origin of this anthology and how this project came to be.
So interestingly enough, we, again, did By Visibility, and our second volume was Still By, and Dan was an editor on Still By. And I want to pass the baton to Dan, and because you really wanted to do a trans anthology, and we're like, yeah, let's do that. And we'd love to help as much as we can so you can take the baton and really run with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we worked on By Visibility, the second volume, Still By, together. That anthology was bigger than the first volume of By Visibility, so the teams were bigger, the responsibility was bigger, and there are a lot more stories with a lot more genres to offer. There are, of course, a lot of very personal and autobiographical stories, but the genre stories were very fun too. And we always knew we wanted to do another queer anthology, and we weren't sure if we wanted to make it broad queer identities or try and hone in on something a little bit more specific. And as we were talking about it, we did land on a trans anthology would probably mean the most to a lot of audiences, especially as I started reading a lot more trans and queer comics. We wanted to get a lot of independent creators together to try and tell those stories. And the more we talked about it, the more excited we became, and the more contact we had with other creators. We knew that this is something that could work and that there is a definite audience for. I know because I am the audience and I'm always looking for something like this. So we knew it would be a great thing to create and contribute to. So that involved reaching out to a lot of people and finding a lot of forums where we could find creators to tell the different stories that are out there. A lot of them, whether they're specifically autobiographical or not, are very personal and meaningful stories, and a lot of them are very fun to tell. So we landed on it just because we talked about it for so long and knew that people out there wanted it.
There was definitely a big demand, right? We always look for intersectionality in all of our anthologies. So By Visibility, had a story about a bisexual trans character that Dan wrote for their second volume. And our anthology that came between By Visibility and Transphoria, Hairology, also had it was all about stories all about hair, had a story about a trans woman's relationship with her hair. And our Slice of Life webtoon has, recurring trans character who's a sibling of one of our major characters. So and whenever we go to Prides, there's always people who be like, oh, where's your trans anthology when they're looking at our anthology list. So the hunger for it was, sorry?
Well, I was going to mention the enamel pins too. Like we have enamel pins of all different flags and different identities, and the trans fox in particular was so popular, and they're like, wow, we're really happy that you have this. And it's like, wait, we should be doing it for comics as well. But continue, Phil. I just want to mention the enamel pins is also like a big sign of people wanting more trans representation.
Basically, every direction you turned, everyone was like, please give us trans representation. And we were like, yeah, let's do that.
On the note of those enamel pins, were you at C2E2 selling those pins last year?
We were, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we would have briefly met there. Remember, I came to your booth twice to buy that fox pin. I
do remember that now. Honestly, the flashback is being brought. That's so interesting. And we were so sad we didn't make C2E2 this year because we're fitting other travel cons, and we're like, no, we got to go back. We love the crowd of C2E2.
And yeah, that Hairology story, you're talking about the Tilly Bridges one, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just read that this week, and I even had to shout out Tilly afterwards because we've been exchanging. I'm trying to get her on the show when she's not so dang busy, but like that was exactly my experience as well. I didn't know I had curly hair until I came out and started growing it out, and now it's like my favorite thing. It's wonderful.
We love that story. It honestly feels like it would be at home in Transphoria. It's such a positive and bouncy and like beautiful story about gender euphoria. So
the art fits so well for it as well. It's just like it all's married together so well.
I mean, you got stretch goals. Maybe we can add a few more pages.
I like the suggestion.
Now, I know all of our guests today are contributing stories to the book in one form or another. So how about we all go around and let's hear about the story each of you are personally contributing.
Kat, I could start it off. Our story that we have in there is a 4-page story from the world of Slice of Life of our webtoon. It actually wasn't part of the anthology until a month ago. We actually curated the full book, and then we were gearing up for release, and we were looking at all of our previous work, and we noted that Hairology we didn't have a story for. And it was something that, we aren't sure if it was the right call because we weren't sure if that alienated part of our audience who likes our work. But By Visibility had a story about one of our pansexual characters from our webtoon. It led to a big turnover from our webtoon. People who maybe wouldn't have otherwise checked out a bisexual anthology because they're a fan of those characters. So we were like, we have a recurring trans character in Slice of Life. Do a story about her, and we pulled it together pretty quickly. Slice of Life's always easy to write because it's our baby, and now it's in there, and we love it. And God,
yeah.
If you that.
No, that's exactly it. It was just a story we've always wanted to tell in the main series. So it's just like, oh, we have the opportunity to tell it here. And this is a character people really like from Slice of Life. So we want to tell more of that. And it was also kind of cool because as someone who's bisexual, kind of tell it from a bisexual angle as well. So yeah, it was a fun story that maybe wouldn't have been in the book, but we're happy we did because we think a lot. Yeah, because we think a lot of Slice of Life fans that might have not checked out the book is now reading it, and again our audience as well, and hopefully it just puts Transphoria in more people's hands.
I did the abridged close enough tale of how I learned I was non-binary, which is a 4-page comic and is really all about the show that introduced me to androgyny in a big way and kind of opened the door to me realizing androgyny was an option and something I could pursue. And that is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. It is very silly to say this anime was my queer awakening, but if you were to poll people and ask who here was made queer by JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, it would not be a small group. I can tell you that. It was very much the thing that kind of introduced me to this flow and balance between masculinity and femininity in a way I'd never seen before, and really opened the door to me not just questioning who I was, but starting to give me an answer to that question. So I kind of wanted to pay tribute to that. And I don't know, I felt like I could package it in a really fun, silly 4-page format that is chock full with a ton of Easter eggs to the wonderful art of Hirohiko Araki. And I do have to super fucking commend the rest of the creative team, Janssen Carbonell on art and Taylor Esposito on letters, who just absolutely kill it and do a wonderful job bringing this world of Baba's eccentric journey, let's say, to life.
The fact you were able to condense this to a anthology short comic appropriate length is nothing short of a Herculean task for you, Ben, and I just want you to know how proud I am that you were able to accomplish that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It is, again, I could do a whole podcast on just about JoJo and how goddamn queer it is.
That's and next month, Ben has a new podcast.
Yes. Well, that's not even getting to, to this day, the manga's newest part, which is giving us our first just full-on canon trans representation among the main cast. Dragona Joestar, you fucking icon. And anyway, I'm going to cut myself off there before I keep going on the JoJo train.
Daniel, save us from this. Let's hear about your story.
Ooh, before I get into that, I should say I don't know much about JoJo, but the only thing I do know is that my friend who is an artist is obsessed with it, and the way friends rant back and forth about their interests to each other, the only things he sends me are character designs to rant about how cool the styles are and how much he wants to dress like them. So, this JoJo's strongest impact on me, that I know the way these characters look more than anything, and it's always been
the poses
for years.
Which we pay tribute to a lot of the famous JoJo poses. His influence comes straight from like full on high fashion and fashion magazines, which is just, he is it's very much opened my eyes, and fashion's been a huge part of my gender journey, and fashion is a huge part of JoJo's. And so not just as a non-binary person, but as a writer, its influence has made fashion a much bigger part of my own work.
Yeah, amazing. When I read your script, I was very excited for this particular friend of mine to see that when Transphoria does come out. But I did want to shout that out, that even though I don't consider myself a JoJo fan, this has also been its influence on me. But my story for the Transphoria, it's called HRT Tales. And well, first for By Visibility, the story I contributed was a gothic story. It was called Portrait of the Vampire, and it was about the vampire's relationship to not being able to see a reflection. I was trying to play with gender dysphoria with that. So I got to write that fun gothic genre story for By Visibility. And then when I was thinking about what kind of story we wanted for Transphoria and looking at all the great scripts we had already gotten, I knew as a queer audience member what kind of story would I want to be seeing in there. And the topic of hormone replacement therapy is something that is very important to me, mostly because I think in a lot of recent years there's been a lot of fear mongering about it, talking about misinformation spreading about over exaggerated dangers and trans healthcare trying to be ripped away from a lot of people. And that was something that impacts a lot of people and delays getting gender affirming care. So I know I wanted to write a script about that. So that is how I kind of developed the story and developed the script that I wanted to write. And the artist for that, Zuzana Lewandowska, they were able to convey that very stylistically, because the tone of the story I wanted to keep mostly playful and light, while commenting on the importance of it, that gender affirming care needs to be accessible for the people who want it, and the positive impact it could have, because it's such a heavy conversation, especially for if you have it with your families or friends, just that there's the euphoric side of it that you're going to come out of it. If those are the effects you want, you should go for it. So I was glad to take a step back from my very gothic genre heavy writing that's very usual, and kind of drown myself into something that's very personal. And I think trans readers, whether they're on HRT or have thought about it, would be oh, this is important to know. I'm glad to see that kind of representation there, or if people who aren't trans are reading it, they're like, oh, that's good to know, because there's so much either misinformation or just not a lot of awareness or knowledge about hormone replacement therapy and it's how good it is for a lot of people.
I can't even count the number of recently transitioned friends of mine that just getting that one trans friend's input on like the truth of what happens when you begin HRT has been invaluable in convincing them to finally start, because they've only heard the fear mongering before. But once they start making friends in the community and getting those details, like all of a sudden it isn't this terrifying nebulous thing. Now they actually have a direct experience and someone who can kind of put those fears to rest. So I really hope that story does the same for a lot of readers out there. Now, Daniel, I know that you have probably a rather unique relationship with all of the stories in this book as the lead editor of the team. So could you tell us a bit about what your involvement with each of these stories looked like as they were developed and made ready for the anthology?
Yeah, I could probably go step by step. So first, we really received a lot of script submissions, and we received so many. So narrowing that down was already a feat. And there are so many stories that if there's a second volume, we'd love to see similar resubmitted scripts for it. But we know for an anthology, every anthology I look at, or any comic that I read, comics that are like interviews of a lot of people, you want intersectional stories, diverse stories, both in like the identities represented, the style they're told in, the genre, what kind of art will be matched with it. So that was part of narrowing down what our script selection would look like. And then what I was looking for while editing and working with the writers later on as we were doing developmental or line editing was what kind of emotions were connected with the story. So whether it was like something very autobiographical and personal or a lighthearted comedy, what kind of themes were they touching on, making sure to develop that. I know one of the stories that is popping to my mind is the Beach Day story. That's about somebody who recently got top surgery and they're supposed to wait a year before they go into the sun. It's a comedy story. And he's very excited to finally go out into the sun post top surgery. So working on that just to make sure it was succinct, that like all the jokes landed was, I think, a good like embodiment for what working with each script and with each writer was like. Because we wanted to talk with each writer and say, like, what's the core of what you're trying to convey? How do we do that in the best way? And will the art, how can the art best match that? Like, we want to keep that fun tone that Beach Day was going for. Keeping the writer's message is the most important part of, I guess, editing and working with them, what their core, what their theme is.
Now, digging a little deeper in that, with a question for all the editors here, like with receiving so many deeply personal stories for really all of your anthologies you've done so far, what does your selection process usually look like when deciding which stories will go into the book?
Honestly, just to add a little, and then Phil, you piggyback on, is just it really has to do with genres. If we're being honest, it was so funny because we just did a podcast about an hour ago, and we kind of figured that it was so interesting that you could get so many great stories that are all kind of in a like this is the autobiographical story, this is the horror story, but if you have a different genre, it's a little bit easier to be like, oh, we don't have that type of story. So that's kind of the biggest way we do it. But Phil, you piggyback off of that.
Yeah, I think one thing we do differently with our anthologies, or I should say that not every anthology goes through the process of, is you don't need to apply as a full team. You can apply individually as a writer, an artist, colorist, letterer, etc. And we do ask for writers to submit full, complete scripts, not just concepts or beat sheets or anything like that. So to your point, Dan and Tomi, it's a big job. We had well over 100 scripts to read. I think for Transphoria it was close to 200 scripts, and
I think it took us 3 days. I want to say
3 full sessions to go through them, and that's with reading the scripts beforehand. That's just 3 full day sessions of talking about them and narrowing down. You get, especially with a personal something as personal as your sexuality or gender identity, you get a lot of personal autobiographical stories, and you need those in an anthology like this. It's what people expect to read, but you can only have so many in order to have a well-balanced anthology. So like Kat said, a lot of the time those really unique spins, those like genre stories, like stand out to you and make it a little easier to kind of select, because if you have 200 submissions and 40% of them are autobiographical, maybe 10% of those are going to have some unique element that stands out, or like a really strong, succinct writing style, or like really specific theme, versus like,
Or
oh, I got
different tone too, because we picked a couple autobiographies that were comedy leaning, and that was like, oh, we don't have a comedy, so we could do this as a comedy story.
Yeah, it's always our goal with our anthologies. We want them to be informative, we want them to be fun, we want them to be diverse, and we want to have a wide range of genres. So, a lot of parents, for example, buy our anthologies to, relate to their children, or friends to relate to family. So we want stories that are educational and accessible to people who maybe aren't as knowledgeable or informed about trans and non-binary experiences and issues, but also, stories that like a really unique genre twist, a horror take on, a trans coming out story that would appeal to somebody who is not new to the world of trans and non-binary storytelling. So, it's finding that middle ground and making sure that you have a well-balanced book. And thankfully, like Dan said, with after the first By Visibility, which was a little shorter, it had 9 stories. We've kind of graduated now to more consistently having larger anthologies. This one has 19 stories. So it's a lot. There's definitely something for everyone, we always like to say.
I know you mentioned earlier that your story in this anthology, as well as in By Visibility, tie into your series Slice of Life. Could you tell us a bit about like how you came to that decision, and like what makes you decide between like if you're gonna be absent from an anthology, if you'll do an original story, or if you'll tie it in with one of your series?
It was a really hard decision, I would say that, because again, I went to the last month. They were like, should we do it, should we not? And again, like kind of what we said earlier is more about, because we run these Kickstarters and a lot of people follow the books because we wrote it, we thought it would be stronger with maybe our backers, that to try out, if people who are on the fence, if we had a slice of life story, especially the webtoon, which has like over 60,000 subscribers. That's 60,000 people that could potentially check out this book and learn about either trans issues or just get something out of it. So that it was a really hard decision maker, because Heraldry, we didn't have a story.
Yeah. And it was something, Heraldry was a success in the end, but Heraldry was an anthology we had to work a little harder to get our audience to jump on board with. That could be for a variety of factors. It was queer, but it wasn't entirely queer like all of our other anthologies. And we did not have our own voice in there, versus By Visibility, Rainbow Canvas, our other anthologies. We had stories in them. And in 2 of the 3 cases, we had specifically slice of life stories that is our biggest property with the biggest fan base. So adding that story was, in the end, a decision in the interest of converting as much of our audience as possible. We want this book in as many hands as possible, because we want these stories to be read by as many different people as possible. And we also just didn't want to take anyone's slot away. That's why we added it in the end as kind of a last minute addition, not when we were curating the book. We didn't really have a page count in mind necessarily when we were curating the book. We knew we wanted a graphic novel. We knew we probably wanted less than 100 pages, just, for budgetary reasons, but we didn't want to occupy a slot unless, we knew that, okay, we got everything in this anthology that we feel needs to be in here from this process of curating the book.
And as someone who doesn't work on Slice of Life, but worked on this with them, I could attest to Phil and Kat were really debating for a while about it. And for a while, it didn't look like they were going to include the Slice of Life script. And they're 2 of the most like empathetic and I guess emotionally in tune with their audience, writers and editors I've seen. Yeah. And I will say that I don't work on Slice of Life again, but I'm a fan of Slice of Life. I'm always in the comments section, and their audience loves all of the characters, all of the queer stories that they tell, and they, like they mentioned earlier, they're always like, oh, do you have trans pin? Do you have trans characters coming? So I do think that the addition with the trans character, your audience will appreciate the script that you put into that, and how it helps develop the character. Because again, I know Slice of Life as an audience member and through your comment section, and the audience, I think, is going to be happy with what you've written for Slice of Life for the anthology, and your audience will want, I think, Transphoria as a whole, because it is something that they've been actively, rooting for, these kind of queer stories, kind of gender stories. But both you, Phil and Kat, are very aware of the stories you're telling, the space you take up. And as someone who watched the debate live on whether or not you would include it, I am glad that the script that got in is going to be told.
And something we really was important to us was when we did the script, the first person we asked was Dan, like, read it. Is this like there was like a specific line I remember. I was like kind of like, Dan, is this good? Is this what we should be doing? But this line in particular is like, yeah, no, that's a really good line. Like be like, okay, cool. Like I want it from your perspective. And same thing for even when you weren't the editor on Slice of Life, when that character did show up, we're like, Dan, what's your opinion? Let us know, because that's the point. If we could tell this story, we need your perspective. And that's something that was really important to us.
Because we keep talking about the story without really talking about what it's about, just to add a little context, it's one of our most prominent recurring characters, Chris, who is bisexual and appears very frequently in Slice of Life, visiting her trans sister at college for the first time since her sister Charlie was kicked out of their family home for coming out as trans. And both characters appear in Slice of Life. Their relationship is addressed in Slice of Life, but we really like this opportunity to kind of tell a side story that's distant from what's going on in the main events of the series right now, and also tell an intersectional story that touches on Chris's bisexuality, which is an important part of her character, and obviously a big part of our audience resonates with because of our work on volumes of Bi Visibility. But then also to talk about Charlie's experience as Chris's sister, as a trans woman.
Now, Ben, I know this isn't your first time being featured in an anthology like this, and I'd like to know what your process looks like when you're trying to come up with an idea for a submission for a comic anthology and tailoring a short story for submission criteria.
Yeah, I've done a few anthology stories. I did a story in Once Upon a Time Machine Volume 2 from Dark Horse, a few other tales floating around. I definitely sometimes try to think, Phil and Kat, you were talking about balance, trying to have a different balance of tones. So I'm always naturally drawn to comedy and jokes. So in this instance, where I kind of figured a lot would be very biographical, come from a place of really just like deep, heavy emotions, I thought, something fun and campy and euphoric could be something nice to balance it out, get some smiles in there alongside the feels. So especially for an anthology, whether it's like 4 pages or 8 pages, it's definitely got to be a more careful construction. Normally, especially, if I have like issues or graphic novels, I have a little more runway. I'll, come up with the plot and just start going and be like, cool, well, this is going to take the real estate it takes, and we'll wrangle it and we'll figure out how to wrangle it as we go. But for an anthology, I think you really got to go into it knowing exactly what each page is going to be accomplishing, since you have so little space to tell a story and make an impact. So especially with this story, 4 pages was kind of like, I definitely kind of tried to structure it as a joke, kind of set up, build up, punchline at the end. But yeah, I would say that's the biggest difference between anthology stories and the longer stories, issued and long stories and graphic novels, is that difference between write an outline, aim for how many pages you'll think you'll need, and just let it rip and figure it out along the way, versus this much more, careful clockwork sense of like, no, I need to know I have just such a finite amount of real estate. I need to know exactly what each page is going to accomplish to make the story work.
I'll say from the moment we read your script, it definitely felt very like someone who's been around the block writing stories for anthologies. It was very tight, and you could tell just how much thought you put into what went on each page specifically, and the setup punchline, like you said. So you actually, I don't think we've told you this. You're our second JoJo inspired story that we've had in an anthology.
Yeah,
also,
same artist, I think.
Same artist too, which we didn't.
Yeah, same artist.
I mean,
don't worry, they're very different stories and they look very different. Despite
the outfits that Janssen came up with, the fashions, just the sexy androgynous psychic ghosts.
Yes. I'll send you the story we had in Hairology.
I'm telling you, the JoJo weep to gay pipeline is so real. I mean, you've got Golden Wind and Stone Ocean. No matter which gender you end up being or fancying, it's got you covered.
We've definitely learned that. Anthology. I didn't think anthologies would be my queer introduction to JoJo, but here we are, 2 in a row.
Now, Kat and Phil, would you say that your experience writing more short form comics for Webtoon, or at least much more bite-sized chapters, has lent to your ability to write short anthology comics, or are the two just a very different beast that the skills don't cross over?
I actually think it's the complete opposite, which is so interesting because we write it in a sequential format for Slice of Life, but we kind of write it in longer issues. So like when we plot Slice of Life, we're plotting for the 40 to 50 page issue that so happens to be part of the webcomic. And it's one of the only books I feel like we get to dive deep into so much because it's such long form. So it's so interesting because we release it as like short form, but when we think about it in a writing format, it is our long form book. It's our serialized. One of Phil's favorite shows is Good Trouble and the Fosters, and we always describe it as like the Fosters because it's that show that kind of just lasts forever, and you get to really dive deep into these characters
over a decade with a single character kind of feeling. I agree exactly with what Kat's saying. Slice of Life, there's a lot of room to tell the story long form over time, but obviously they're broken up into short form installments. But to your question, Tommy, I do think that just in general, brevity is a writing skill you get when you write more. Like, I think using your space skillfully is just something that you master over time.
We've even gotten better with Slice of Life. Yeah, I think you're going to say the same thing. That there's early chapters where it takes 10 pages to do something. You're like, wait, now we would do that in 6, just out of circumstance.
Our first issue, quote unquote, of Slice of Life, where we collected 40x pages of series was like 4 chapters, and then our most recent one was probably like 10 chapters. So like it shows that we're breaking up into shorter installments. And also, if you look at anthologies, I think by visibility, Kat, your story in that first volume was like 10 pages, and then look at Rainbow Canvas or Transphoria, we have like 4-page stories. I think just over time you kind of it's a skill you hone. Obviously, certain stories demand real estate, especially like when you're tackling complex themes and characters. But it's a skill to be able to tell a story in a short amount of space. And actually, everyone on this call had a 4-page story, and everyone used their space really well, I think. So.
And when you write a lot, and you have to write like let's say weekly, when you're writing a lot of stories, and currently, how many series do we have right now? Like 10. So like we're writing. I don't even know what we have, and that's current. Like that's like not they're concurrently being worked on 10 books, and it's just like at that point, sometimes you also are just writing so often that you just kind of like a lot of times I'll write and I won't panel it out right away. I'll just do dialogue, and I could tell how many pages it's going to be just from dialogue without paneling it out because it's just like you're just doing it so consistently. You kind of just understand like how to write to a certain amount of pages.
The answer always is, how do you write? By writing. You always learn new skills in writing and how to be a better writer just by writing. Write that first script and then write that second script, and you'll become a better writer just by virtue of writing and interrogating your work, and of course reading.
On that note, with a little luck, within a year and a half time, I hope to be in the same position you were with Slice of Life of converting a webtoon into a physical release comic. So could you share some insight on what that process looks like once you have all these established panels and strips from webtoon and reformatting that for a traditional comic format? Does it require much redrawing of artwork or just restructuring? That's new to me.
We actually worked in reverse. We knew that we would want to do a print version of Slice of Life. So all of Slice of Life is actually drawn as sequentials to start, and then we convert it to webtoon. So we kind of, it's almost designed to be print first, and then we do the conversion for what is on webtoon. So it's always ready to go. We have to double letter it because webtoon, you need larger text just to properly fit on the screen for that vertical scrolling format. But plenty of webcomic creators do the opposite, where they start from webcomic and then convert it to sequentials. It is a more involved process, and does, from my understanding, we've proved friendly with a lot of webcomic creators who've taken the other route. It's a little more work, but it's definitely doable. You might want to get more creative with your page specifications. A lot of webtoon creators who do print media don't use like US standard comic size. They might use like, manga size or like a more custom size, and their paging and their paneling might be a little different. They might, do fewer
Less
panels per
panels
page.
usually.
Yeah, to have that flexibility, because, when you're creating a comic in the vertical scrolling format, you're not necessarily thinking about the composition of everything together. You might have a small panel followed by a huge panel, followed by a small panel, and, in sequentials, there's no easy way to make that fit with, 2-3 other panels on the page to get your standard 5 or 6 panel page. So, it's about creativity. So, but it's doable. A lot of incredibly successful web comic
I
creators.
think Lore Olympus didn't. It started vertical, and
They do, yes.
Yeah,
I think
so
I think a lot of the really popular originals. I don't know about Let's Play. I think Let's Play might have done too. Started in the vertical
I think
format.
they did.
Converted.
Now, Daniel, with this being, to my knowledge, your first couple forays into writing comics, I'm real curious about what kind of aspirations you have for your comics career in the future. Like, do you plan to focus mainly on editing, or do you hope to shift more toward writing as you progress?
I've been very fortunate to be working with Phil and Kat a lot, that I have been able to indulge both of those things. I do love both equally. I think if I keep pursuing writing, it would be more in this like independent, small time space, because I do like working in this kind of close environment where you get to know these creators and artists that you work with, and the freedom you have with the scripts you're able to produce and finding what you need. That's been great as a writer, to adapt to what kind of anthology and really work with the team, see what themes you want to focus on, what the anthology needs, and play with that. But editorially, I'm only a recent graduate, so I would like to explore more in the editorial team, because that has been one of the, I discovered, was greatest joy of working both on By Visibility and on this. I think that just as an editor, your job being to make the story like not the best version of what you want it to be, but the best version of what this author is trying to tell, the best version that this author wants, is just very gratifying, very rewarding, because you get to dip your toes into a lot of different genres, into a lot of different tones, and that kind of adaptability working from script to script. That's something that it's hard work on the mind in the most satisfying way, because you get to work closely with them, put yourself in their place, and then also even detach a little bit and be like, oh, we're very close to here. Let's see, like, oh, from an audience perspective who might not have those kind of close personal feelings, what is the best way to move forward? So, moving from like the larger developmental editing to the close, like line by line editing, that's, I enjoy every step of the way. So editing, I think, is more where I'm leaning towards, but always working with small time creators, working on these small scripts that anthologies need, and getting, what I think are valuable and important stories out there is always going to be something I'm going to pursue, at least in some part of my life.
On that note of critique within the realm of comic creation, I had a question for you, Kat, in regards to your YouTube channel, Comic Uno. I know a lot of my listeners might know you from that channel where you're often ranking and critiquing new comics. And I've always been really worried about being negative at all toward any book on either of my podcasts, just because there's so many good ones out there. I don't want to be that person that like brings down a creator's day if they hear me say something bad about their book. But with you working in this realm, both like helping creators bring their books to life while also sometimes adding like numeric value to art, do you find that this creates any complications when working with professionals in the industry? And does it ever lead to burn bridges for you?
Luckily, no. Honestly, when I was a journalist before all this, before I did any creating, and I think it really depends on how you are a critic. I think there are certain critics that are there to bring people down, and that is not what Comic Uno is about. The brand, I guess, not the person, because I have Comic Uno, but no, I think they're true criticism. It's a compliment sandwich. I always say that. You can always put the perspective of this wasn't for me, and this is the reason it wasn't for me, but that doesn't mean it's not for anybody else. And you could give the reasonings of why you should pick something up or why you shouldn't, in my perspective. But that, I think that's the balancing act, and that's something I enjoy doing. I enjoy being able to give rightful criticism. Right? I think criticism's art, and I don't believe that you should put anyone down, and that's something I don't love seeing in reviews. Is any time where it's like you should never say the words "this sucks" because that's not a review. A review is when you're like, "This worked" or "This didn't work," and that's something I've always wanted to express with my reviews. And anytime I've met a creator, a lot of times they'll be like, "I love your reviews because you do that because." You're true to your thoughts. I'm not getting a yes man. I'm not getting this is a 5-star book because I just love you, but you're also not being a mean person. You're just you're being balanced. And even when you don't like something, you'd be like, but this worked out, or never. You got to be well balanced with it. Is it a hard balancing act? Yeah, for sure. But I've been doing criticism for over 15 years. So you kind of learn the balancing act also.
Piggybacking as a friend of Kat who sees a lot of not comic, a lot of actual Kat. She very much values like honest but fair criticism. I could walk out of a movie with Kat. She'll be like, I did not like that. It is not for me. And then you watch a review and she will take the time to go through this is what did work or what might work for someone else. Like she's a very even-handed reviewer. And, this is something we talk about a lot, actually, just what is fair criticism. You're not going to see, outrage clickbait from Kat where it's just, like the rage baiting. So that's something I respect a lot about her, enjoy working with her and watching her reviews for.
Yeah, as someone who's also with Kat a lot socially, if we just saw a movie, like Phil said, she'll be say what she thought and they'll be like, do you want to know what Comic Uno thought? And we'll give
Comic Uno's a different person.
Yeah, she does go on. She'll speak and then say, want to know what Comic Uno thought? And then it is a very thoughtful analysis and review. So Kat Comic Uno puts a lot of work into the very thoughtful and careful criticism that she puts out there.
We really respect Comic Uno and we like Kat.
Comic Uno is a much better person than Kat. No, and I appreciate that. No, I very much appreciate that from the outside looking in. And I think honestly, what I was also going to add is help in our own from all three of us, our own creative space as editors, where we could. I put my Comic Uno hat on a lot of times. I honestly, I put the Comic Uno hat when me and Phil are writing, where he'll be like, "Is that a 5-star review from Comic Uno?" And I'll be like, "No," and this is why, and this is why. And then we correct it because of that. Because they're like, oh, as like Kat, I love this because I wrote this. But if I was reviewing it as a critic, this is the things I thought were wrong, or not wrong, but like, that could be elevated. And honestly, that's helped us in our own writing. But then also between me and Phil in particular, talking to each other with criticism, I feel like we've been better at it's like, obviously you're putting your heart and soul into something. And sometimes it's hard to tell your partner, hey, I don't think that worked. And I think the criticism side has helped us both. And Phil has also picked up on a lot of the criticism side too, where we get to communicate with each other better, where we don't yes man each other, but we also say, hey, this doesn't work because of this. And I think our quality of our book is better because of it.
We know the language to use now because, like Kat said, it's very, writing is personal and you want it to be the best it could be. You want the fair criticism of what could be better. But I think we are good at now at knowing each other's like triggers where it's like, oh, don't say this exact word, or don't say this doesn't work, change it. Say this doesn't work because of this, change it.
Or this doesn't work and I don't know how to fix it. Oh, well.
Yeah, even just saying I don't know how to fix it helps a little bit, or saying what you had in mind. But no, it's working with someone. Working with comics are collaboration, so it's always working with someone. But use your collaborators, bounce ideas off of each other. That's the way that you create the best art that you can.
Never yes man people. I think that's always been my best answer of like either our friendship between me and Dan and Phil. I don't know why I left you out, Phil, in that moment.
Did Kat leave him out, or did Comic Uno leave him out?
Oh, the Comic Uno is definitely left.
It was the third ego. It was business Kat.
There is business Kat in the egos as well. But no, I think that's also just kind of that's kind of interesting as well, is just being able to do all that and balance all that. Business Kat's a whole another Kat. She's crazy.
We could do like a whole Big Brother house of all of Kat's alter egos.
I think Fun Kat. She's cool.
Music Kat, food Kat.
Food Kat. Put her down.
Schedule Kat's the worst.
Now, to give our listeners a dose of almost preemptive feedback, I'd like to know what advice the group has for creators that are looking to submit stories or ideas to anthologies like this, and what they can do to prepare a good submission that might stand out among the others?
Like Kat mentioned earlier, standing out is always a good thing. So, if you're submitting to using this as an example, a trans non-binary anthology, a genre story with a unique twist, or even just a unique setting, a unique character / voice, like you want to stand out and, put your best foot forward, because that's the best way to get noticed by a editorial team that may be reading hundreds of submissions. Also, there's nothing wrong with submitting multiple stories. One of our contributors submitted 3 different scripts, and we liked all 3. But in the end, one of them fit best in the anthologies.
Parology, the 2, we loved all 3 of one of the stories, and it's like, what do we pick? And it was honestly really.
It was the JoJo one, actually, that we talked about earlier. The writer of that, she had submitted.
And that was a writer who's never published before either.
Yeah, it was her first work, and it did not.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It was fantastic.
Yeah, my advice as someone, on the submitter side is, whatever you're writing about, whatever genre it is, just make sure it's coming from a place of something real, whether it's silly or fun or serious or dark or traumatic. Just make sure that you're speaking from some true emotions. It doesn't have to be true to life. It can be fictional, but make sure that you're writing about something that's true to you, that you care about, that is, because if it's not meaningful for you, how is it going to be meaningful for anybody else? So, you only got so many pages, so make them count and do them and make them something that you can really be proud about pouring yourself into.
And honestly, and this is just advice I've gotten over the years before we even started doing anthologies, try to have someone else read it. That way it'd be like, oh, in your perspective, it could be like this, and that, and be like, oh, well, I actually didn't get that from this story. Maybe do another run. And honestly, grammar checks, I think that's always great too. Not that we would never pick something because there's like one grammar mistake, but if the language is a little hard to get through, it'll make it maybe a little harder to choose. So I think also just making sure you've read it a few times. I've definitely seen people submit like right away. You could kind of tell that they just wanted to get it out there. It's like their first draft. And sometimes we do choose those because they're just wonderful stories and great. But if we're between one and another story, we might go with the one that was a little easier
polished.
more polished. And that kind of goes with descriptions too. Sometimes there's descriptions that are just like so long, and then the language is a little, chopped up. That's for everything, not just the dialogue, but also like the presentation of your script.
Yeah, and my advice is similar to Ben's, especially if you're a new writer. It could be difficult to really like get in touch with your emotions and feel comfortable to get that in the script. So that's why drafting is important. You want to make sure, again, that the theme, the emotional message, whatever the core emotion you have is in there, and not to be afraid of, I guess, wearing your heart on your sleeve, putting that on the page, because that is what will connect with an audience, will make you stand out. Another thing just about comics specifically, if you're maybe a different kind of writer, or you like poetry or prose, because comics is such a visual medium, what we loved in submissions were, even if you're not an artist, if you're thinking about the visuals and there are cool visuals that were like, this is a very thoughtful script writer, even if you're not going to draw it, you thought about what it will look like, and reading your script, if we could visualize it and it's something that stands out, is cool or very meaningful, that's going to make your script stand out and will show how much of a thoughtful writer you are, and how thoughtful you are for an audience who's going to be looking at something that's visually conveyed through whatever the artist designs.
Yeah, another piece of, again, practical advice, especially if you are coming at this, first time comic writer looking to submit and try the medium. One big thing is very different from prose or poetry. You can include reference images. You can do that. You can just drop a link in there. You do not need to spend 3 paragraphs explaining every detail of a location or a fashion or what have you. Just drop a JPEG.
Much easier to read on that. Also, something that I will put out there. This is OCD Cat here. Follow directions. We've had probably, I would say, 30% of our submissions are either like not the right page count, might be a prose story, might be a screenplay, like things that you can't convert into a comic. So follow directions also.
I'll say the best way to get on Kat's bad side is to not follow the directions when you're submitting. We'll still read your submission. We'll still give it a fair shot, but it gets you off on the wrong foot.
Be honest, will you be making fun of it in the review sessions?
Yeah, it depends on how badly you didn't follow the directions.
Less making fun of more and like, what did you see this? Did I open the wrong file? And then busting it anyway.
Is this a 40-page novel? What? I thought this was
we've gotten, let's say, problematic submissions at times that sometimes you can't help but like squint and shake your head at sometimes. So, you know, I don't think we would make fun of anything that comes our way, but there are definitely some that make you scratch your head a little bit.
You're like, oh, this is the wrong anthology that you submitted to.
Like, did they know that this was a comic anthology?
That said Transphoria, not Transphobia.
With the success of this Kickstarter hitting its goal so quick, aiming for multiple stretch goals now, and last I checked being at 175-ish% of its target goal, what do the odds look like of us seeing a Transphoria Volume 2 in the near future?
I think it's very high. What we learned from By Visibility, though, is that we don't want to do it on a yearly basis. I think something with By Visibility Still Buy was that we should have skipped another year and done a different project because we think Still Buy could have been, and it was very successful, but we think it could have been even more successful if we didn't do it back to back. So we will not announce here, but we are already in talks of another thing we're going to be doing that is in the queer space that two are in the queer space. One we're working on right now, actually, that we're really excited for. And then the other one that's going to be more in this vein where it's going to be open submissions that we're really excited for. So we'd love to do another volume for trans, but we don't think it'd be in 2025. But if we do another volume, I think the earliest would be 2026.
Now, I do have a personalized question of the week here to wrap us up. But before I move to that, are there any final thoughts in regards to Transphoria that you'd like to share with the audience?
All I would like to share is thank you for being such a wonderful host with such wonderful questions and such thoughtful questions. It really, really means the world to us.
I appreciate that. I try and do my best to research my guests and get as much of an idea of their work and what their career looks like before coming into an interview. So I'm glad that paid off.
It shows
very much so.
Such a thoughtful host and great mediator, great communicator. It's been a great podcast session.
Now, for our closing question, since you're doing a lot with this one book and bringing more trans and non-binary representation to the comic book medium, I would like to know what your favorite trans, non-binary, or genderqueer representation from other recent comics you've found lately, or any very inspirational ones going into your writing.
I definitely want to give a shout out Jedzia Axelrod's work on the character Galaxy, the trans superhero. Galaxy, the prettiest star, and the new Hawk Girl miniseries, whose trade paperback just dropped, I think today as we're recording this.
Yeah, and I can see that influence in your work because, Ben, I know you've got your own sci-fi corgi story coming up soon.
Yes, though that was in development way before Galaxy came out. But yes, more and more wonderful corgi action, and we love Argus,
which I can't wait to read. No, for me, I would say Alyssa from Batgirl. That she was like the first person I remember even seeing trans representation for in comics, and that was Gail Simone who did that. So, and obviously just being able to see that character through Burnside and other stuff. So I would say that character.
I'll go into the webcomic space on Webtoon. Two that immediately jumped to my mind. On the Webtoon original side, Boyfriends features one of the lead boyfriends is a trans man, and the creator of the webcomic who we worked with before on Rainbow Canvas is also trans and a delight to work with, and explores a lot of really interesting and specific aspects of his experience, very specifically, and isn't afraid to dive into taboo is not the right word, but dive into topics that you don't always see, including 18 plus topics for themselves and their relationship to their gender identity and sexuality. And then on the Webtoon Canvas side, I'm a big fan of Encore. I think it's on a pretty long hiatus right now, but it's a a boy love romance that where one of the leads is trans man, and I really like the exploration of both the romance and of the two leads, that one of whom the cis one of whom is bisexual. I think there's a lot of really interesting conversation about their individual journeys and their relationship.
Thank you for that. I've been struggling to find good webtoons to cover on the show, so that gives me two really good, helpful directions.
Encore exclamation point.
And yeah, your rainbow canvas like kind of sample or who's who platter on webtoon was also nice. Like, and yeah, hats off for Slice of Life, because like I've really had a hard time getting invested in any webtoons just because like there's a lot of small digestible chunks you have to get through for stories to get going, and it's a medium I'm just not that exposed to. But Slice of Life really caught my interest very quickly, so that's got me opening the app a lot more.
That
Thank you so much.
truly means the world, because it's so interesting coming from a traditional medium where you're like, oh, are we bringing people to webtoons? And we always think, oh, we're bringing webtoon people to Kickstarter. So it's really cool to like hear the opposite too, where it's like, no, also people who really love traditional comics can also go to webtoon. That's kind of always been our biggest goal of Lifeline Comics, is to bridge every different medium and be like, oh, you don't have to just go to the comic book store to get your weekly comics, or you don't just have to read traditional comics to get your weekly comics, and vice versa for webtoon too. Webtoon readers should know that webtoon is comic books. So
it's a lot of the time when you talk to webtoon readers, like, well, I'm not reading a comic, I'm reading a webtoon. It's like, no, it's all comics. And like Kat said, it's very much our mission statement. Every time we do our newsletter posts bi-weekly, we always we try to capture all the areas of comics. We talk about one Marvel DC book, one direct market indie book, one Kickstarter book, and one web comic. We love all comics, and we want our readers and our fans to also love all comics wherever they are published.
And Daniel, didn't mean to get in the way of your answer, but yeah, what have you been liking in the realm of trans rep?
Thank you. Always happy to talk about Slice of Life, but I anticipated about this question and was very excited by it, so I went to my bookshelf. So I did want to highlight too, genderqueer has been getting a lot of traction recently, or conversation, because there are a lot of like book banning campaigns against it, even though it's such a very thoughtful and meaningful story. So I wanted to highlight that because especially schools recently have been targeting it, and I would say unfairly targeting it, because it tells such a very important story of gender exploration and delves very deep into topics that I think schools should have no reason to ban. And then the other one I want to highlight was Fine. This one, the author tells their personal story about gender exploration, and then their name's Rhea. They then interview a lot of people, and they're from the Midwest, so there are a lot of other Midwestern people's experiences, and then they travel to get more different cultures, different religions, different identities, and it's a book all about their own experience with gender, and then how them going around to interview other people, how that impacted themselves, and then putting it all into a book, into a graphic novel. Again, I work with a lot of anthologies. I love getting a lot of different voices and seeing them all thematically connect. So that was a great read for me. I think it came out in 2022, and I would always recommend that.
I love the journalism side of that, because like one thing I love about comics, and I don't think comics do it enough, there's very few comics that do it, is to have a journalistic aspect. Be like, cool, you can actually interview people and do a journalism piece, but through a comic book. I know Kent State was a really good example of that, where they went back to talk about that event, but they went back like 20 years later to interview those people, and they wrote it as like a comic, which I think is cool.
Yeah, and Ray Ewing was actually one of my earliest guests on this show, and they were awesome to talk to. And like, yeah, I was so surprised to see they didn't have much in the realm of comics credits outside of that. But I think it also makes sense because Fine is like really distinct among the realm of comics. Like, I don't personally know of any other examples that are quite like that with its journalism take in the graphic novel field.
That's so exciting that you had them on. I will have to check that out.
As we close out here, can you remind our audience what the last day they'll be able to back Transphoria is going to be?
Yes, let's pull up the campaign here.
June 27th.
You got it first.
I beat you. I always have it open.
I hate that he has all those tabs open.
Kat's very anal about closing her tabs. But last day for Transphoria, Thursday, June 27th at 10 p.m. Eastern time. So you still got almost a full month to check it out, and we strongly encourage you to do so.
I've known the pain of finding an amazing Kickstarter book months after the campaign ended. So, folks, if you're hearing this in time, you'll want to check this out while you can.
For sure.
If y'all are comfortable with it, would you want to plug your social media or tell our audience where they can find you and follow your future projects?
Yeah, for me at Comic Uno, the best place to learn more information about what we're doing is on our Substack for Lifeline Comics. So go check that out. We post every 2 weeks and we update you on literally everything we're doing. So go check that out.
Yeah, you'll see a little of Comic Uno, a little of Cat, a little of Business Cat. All of them.
She's all there.
She's all over that Substack. But for me, if you could find me, Phil Falco Writes on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, all those good things. And like Kat said, Lifeline Comics Substack, great place for all of our updates.
I'm new to Twitter, but I'm trying to be more active. So my Twitter @ would be literary_dandy.
Get Dan followers.
Oh, Dan.
Motivate me to stay on social media.
Yeah. Dan, are you on Blue Sky?
No. I
know that the Twitter alternatives seem kind of superfluous, but I have found Blue Sky to be like the awesome hotbed of trans comic creators. So like, yeah, that's where a lot of them migrated to. I know like Jadzia Axelrod, Charlie Jane Anders, Tilly Bridges, a lot of others are really active on Blue Sky.
Our announcement post on Blue Sky for Transphoria did very well. So very much supports exactly what you just said.
That was the perfect pitch to get me on there. So thank you. It'll probably be the same username so long as there are no problems. So literary_dandy will probably be on there by the time this comes out.
Blue Sky, I'm open to sponsorships, just saying.
And so first off, we've just announced a new graphic novel I wrote with art by Giorgio Brooks coming out January 2025. From Oni Press called Mr. Muffins, Defender of the Stars, about a young boy who just wants a day off from his responsibilities, who is instead dragged into an intergalactic war when it turns out the Cosmic Chosen One has been reincarnated as his pet corgi. Just, a boy and his dog story with a whole bunch of super awesome space action. Giorgio's art is just something amazing. So keep an eye out for Mr. Muffins in January. And then you can find me on Twitter at Ben Kahn, and then BenKahnComics.com, where you can definitely make sure to subscribe to my newsletter at benkahn.substack.
Regardless of what happens over the next 6 months, I'm still sure that Mr. Muffins is going to be exactly what we need come January of next year. So
it's going to be so cute.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Again, thank you, Kat, Phil, Daniel, and Ben for taking the time to come on the show. I'm really looking forward to seeing Transphoria come to life and, your future anthologies and hopefully someday Transphoria Volume 2.
Sure. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
If the listeners at home have requests or recommendations for comics or creators you'd like us to cover in the future, you can send them our way on social media. You can find us on the Transcending Comics Instagram and Facebook page, on Twitter as @TranscendComics, or email us at transcendingcomics@gmail.com. We'd like to thank you again for giving our podcast a chance and give a special shout out to Ray Day Parade for designing our logo. Our intro and outro music is A Little Soul and You've Been Starring by Carlson. You can check out more of their music on carlson.com. Join us again next week as we continue to transcend boundaries and explore the colorful world of trans, non-binary, and genderqueer representation in comic books of all kinds. As the curtains fall on this episode of Transcending Comics, remember that comics have the power to inspire change in countless worlds, including our own. Keep reading, keep writing, and keep transcending.